Welcome to the beautiful Oxbow Eco Center. Now, I think this is one of my favorite nature preserves in all of St. Lucie County. With over 4 miles of hiking trails, there's endless amounts of opportunity to get away from the hustle and bustle and into beautiful landscapes like these pine flatwoods. At first glance, these pine flatwoods may look just like a typical forest, but today we're going to take a closer look to see what makes these environments so special. I've jumped on one of the many hiking trails here at the Oxbow Eco Center, and don't worry if you're not a seasoned hiker. You can simply stop in the nature center and one of the staff members will supply you with a trail map and they'll point you in the right direction. And I highly suggest that you come here and visit these trails for yourself. In fact, right now I'm being dwarfed by these towering slash pine trees. Now these things can grow to be up to 60 feet tall and live for almost 200 years. And let me tell you, during that time, they've seen a thing or two. Knowing these forests, these plants and animals, well, that was essential to early inhabitants here in Florida. By knowing these forests, they had access to a plethora of food options and even medicines. Without locations like this, these communities would not have been able to survive or thrive the way that we know them today. From the turpentine industry to the development of Florida, these forests and pines have stood the test of time. Perhaps the most dramatic event to take place here have been the wildfires. For most of us, our first introduction to wildfires was through a friendly American icon, Smokey the Bear. And while most of us think of wildfires and we think of destruction and devastation, here throughout Florida, and especially in these pine flatwoods, fire is not only a necessity, it's also an opportunity for new life. Now, as we hike through Oxbow today, we are surrounded by these spectacular slash pines. And these are one of my favorite trees. They're sort of like the superhero trees out here in the forest. And one of the reasons is because their superpower is being resistant to fire. And not only are they resistant, but they're actually adapted to need or require fire in order for their seeds, such as these, to reach a certain temperature so that they can create new trees in the future. That's pretty neat, right? You'll notice the slash pines right away by their distinctive bark. Now, it might seem like it's no big deal that it's quite flaky and comes off easily, but that's actually an adaptation as well. By this bark peeling off and flaking easily, that actually is an adaptation to help it dissipate heat during a wildfire. That means as a fire sweeps through this forest, that this flaky bark will actually help it survive through a natural wildfire. One of the most common questions that we get is, okay, so we understand these larger, more developed slash pines can survive fires, but what about the younger juvenile seedlings? How do those survive a raging fire that's sweeping through the forest floor? Well, even the seedlings are capable of surviving higher temperatures from wildfires. Now, as fires sweep through this forest, a final adaptation that the slash pine has is that it actually grows tufts of needles around the growing tip of these pine trees. And that means that that growing tip is actually protected from this extreme heat and is able to continue to grow after the fire has passed. Now, it's really important to note that environments like this pine flatwoods, well, they need fires. And instead of suppressing fires, nowadays we do something called a controlled or a prescribed burn. And that's basically just a fire that's started by trained individuals to replicate a wildfire. By initiating these prescribed fires, what we're doing is we're making way for new growth within these pine flatwoods, and we're making room for animals to survive and thrive, just like the gopher tortoise. So this is really neat. We've stumbled upon a wild gopher tortoise. Now, this animal is critically important here in the pine uplands. So it's considered a keystone species. And what that means is that without this animal, there's a plethora of other critters that would not be able to survive without this gopher tortoise. So we're going to go ahead and let this guy return back. We don't want to disturb him too much. Again, this is a nature preserve, so we never want to pick up these animals. We never want to disturb them from their natural behaviors. And so if you see an animal like the gopher tortoise, you just kind of want to give it its space and let it behave as it normally would if you were never here. This is really cool. We've actually stumbled upon a gopher tortoise burrow. The way that the gopher tortoise actually assists and helps these other animals survive, it's adapted with these amazingly well developed claws and front arms that are able to dig these deep burrows into the ground. Now, some of these burrows can reach up to 30 feet in depth down into this sand. And what that means is that if an event such as a wildfire were to occur across this landscape, that other animals, over 300 species, can make their way to these burrows and seek refuge. Without this gopher tortoise, there's a number of different animals that would not be able to survive and thrive here in Florida and the Pine Flatwoods. Some of the animals that you might see sharing this home with the gopher tortoise include things such as the eastern indigo snake and the gopher frog. They live in harmony in these burrows during stressful times such as wildfires. So in my opinion, there's nowhere else in St. Lucie County that you're more likely to encounter a gopher tortoise than here at the Oxbow Eco Center. So if you're out here hiking, keep an eye out for one of these gopher tortoise burrows or even a gopher tortoise walking along the trail. It's more common than you might think. Now, one of the ways to recognize if a gopher tortoise has been in this burrow recently is that the hole going into the burrow will be quite disturbed, and you may even see gopher tortoise tracks entering or leaving this area. This is a really neat encounter. This is one of the species that you might encounter here at the Oxbow Eco Center and also in the Pine Uplands. This is a red rat snake, or also known as a corn snake. Now, we've encountered this snake on the ground, but it's actually an arboreal snake, which means it spends a ton of time living up in the trees. And this snake and many other snakes have hundreds of vertebrae that allow them to wrap themselves around trees and twist and turn and hold on. So even though this red rat snake and several other snake species are completely harmless and non-venomous, snakes in general, well, they tend to get a bad rap. In fact, some people even hunt them on purpose and kill them because they think they're all dangerous. But snakes, they serve an incredibly important role out here in the environment. If you're out here at the Oxbow Eco Center and you encounter a snake, the best way to view and enjoy a snake is to give it its distance. And so you can do this by either walking around a snake or by simply stopping and letting the snake continue on its way. In fact, most snake bites occur whenever someone is either trying to capture and handle a snake or whenever they're trying to kill the snake. So as long as you're not doing either of those things, then the snake will typically leave you alone. Now, the red rat snake is non-venomous, and it's actually quite important because it helps control different rodent populations like rats and mice. Without these apex predators, a lot of those other species might become overabundant and out of control. We've made our way to an ephemeral pond. Now, another name for this area is a depressional wetland, and it's quite wet right now. And that's because we're in the summer months, or the rainy season. But if you were to visit this exact same location during the winter or the dry season, much of this water would actually be gone. So as we transition from the rainy season and into the dry season, and the surrounding pine uplands begin to dry out, these ephemeral ponds act as a refuge or even an oasis for the local wildlife. Because these waters are seasonal, the fish populations are not supported in these locations. Therefore, animals such as frogs are able to better complete their life cycles. Without these ephemeral ponds, well, frogs wouldn't exist in the pine uplands. Here at the Oxbow Eco Center, the ephemeral ponds in the pine uplands are really an ecosystem within an ecosystem, forming a mosaic of habitats. Similar to the pine uplands, these habitats are also dependent on fire. And while it may seem counterintuitive for a wetland to burn, It is fires that occur during the dry season that help to maintain the open nature of this habitat by preventing shrubs and trees from encroaching. It is through places like the Oxbow Eco Center, right here in our very own backyard, that you have the opportunity to use all of your senses, to follow your curiosity, and to immerse yourself in the wild Florida.